All right. Hello there, everybody. This is just a short little impromptu preview of the IU-Nebraska game as I sit in a car in my in-laws' parking lot. We came down to the in-laws this weekend, and, as often happens with the Big Ten tournament around spring break, sometimes it really is kind of an all-hands-on-deck type thing when it comes to post-game shows and not really knowing what the schedule is. And so I will be hosting tonight's show from the car. And so I'm doing this. I really want to test this out and see if it works. And so those of you who are here, if you guys can comment and let me know, how does it sound? Is the video okay? Because, last night when I came on here, I didn't have my video on because I was really worried about the connection. And I have gotten a couple of connection unstable notifications. So I want to do this as a test. We'll get to some Nebraska talk here real quick, and I'll answer some questions. I did not sleep in the car last night. I came back out here. I was able to get inside though, fortunately. So I apologize. It's not going to be you know real aesthetically pleasing. The computer will be bouncing around and stuff, but I just want to make sure it sounds and looks okay. So let me know as we go through here. But and pop any questions in there if you want to. Really just want to talk about the game tonight. Indiana, Nebraska. Indiana obviously on a 5-game winning streak, but has lost 2 in a row to this Nebraska team. And had lost 2 in a row to Penn State as well before winning last night against the Nittany Lions, avenging the season sweep by winning in the Big Ten tournament. And the question now is, can Indiana do that tonight against Nebraska? The answer, of course, is yes, Indiana can do it. This Nebraska team is good, but they're not great. And Indiana, even without Trey Galloway, showed last night that they have the ability, to make some plays. And, if they can, really let their talented front court, kind of own the game, then that's a game that Indiana's going to have a good chance to win. I think the challenge is going to be, can you do that against Nebraska? Because I think anybody who has watched the 2 games against Nebraska and that just kind of understands the full context of this season and this team can see why this Nebraska team is kind of like kryptonite for this Indiana basketball team. And there's a couple of things that have happened in both games that have really hurt the Hoosiers. And the first one is, as we all know, the 3-point line. This is a Nebraska team that takes a ton of threes. Almost 45% of their field goal attempts are 3-point attempts, and they shoot it pretty well. They're in the top 100 in the country, hitting 35.7% of their threes, obviously led by Keisei Tominaga, who has taken 175 of them this season, has made 37% of those threes, and really seems to kind of be the energy that drives this team. When he gets hot, they're at their best. They really feed off of him, his cockiness and how much he gets into it. And so it's obviously imperative that, Indiana, if you're going to let him make some shots, and he will make some, make them be spaced out. Make them be tough shots. Don't let him go on a streak where he hits, 2 or 3 in a couple of minutes, because that's where, in a game like this, Indiana can really lose touch quickly. If Nebraska goes and hits 3 or 4 threes, Indiana is not built to counter that on the other end. And so, again, you look at these first 2 games. In the first game, which Indiana lost 86-70. And, it's interesting that Indiana lost the next game 85-70. So there has been a very particular, way that these games have gone this season. But in that first game at Pinnacle Bank, Indiana actually went 9 of 18 from 3-point range. And, that's one of the best 3-point shooting games Indiana has had. And so you come into a game like this and you would say, okay, Indiana probably needs to take a few more threes. They probably need to make a few more. If Indiana goes 9 of 18 tonight, that would be a big first step toward winning the game. So then how did Indiana still lose by 16? We turned it over 19 times, to Nebraska only turning it over 8 times. And so that is why, Nebraska ends up just really dominating Indiana in terms of shot volume. They just had a lot more possessions, a lot more shots. And so whereas Indiana took 18 threes, which is a pretty good number for this team, Nebraska took 32 and made 12. So, 37.5% from 3, you'll take that, but it's not a particularly red-hot shooting day. It was just killing Indiana with 3-point volume. But the other issue is Nebraska also got to the free throw line 26 times and made 20 free throws. And so the 9-point difference from the 3-point line, the 7-point difference from the free throw line, there's your 16-point difference right there. And a lot of that came down to turnovers, with Indiana having 19 of them. And it was across the board. Trey had 3, X had 4, Malik had 4, Khalil had 4. And that's just too many. And so, to me, as you look at this game tonight from a team standpoint, 3-point shooting is obviously going to be huge. You can't let Nebraska just absolutely go off. And in the second game, which Nebraska won 85-70, they went 14 of 33 from downtown. So, again, a ton of volume, but there you're even letting them shoot a high percentage. So if they're going to be shooting, in the 30s, which they've done twice now against Indiana in terms of attempts, you've got to find a way to, just because of your defensive activity and how hard you're making them work, only allow them to make, 8, 9, 10 of those. And that's still a lot. But if you can do that and limit turnovers, now you can keep touch with this Nebraska team. Because if Indiana's trying to play this game in the high 70s or 80s, I just don't see how we're going to be able to compete with Trey Galloway out and with, I'm going to be kind and say the inconsistent production from our backcourt. I think all those guys are playing their roles well. I think Anthony Leal is playing his role well. Gabe Cupps is playing his role well, but they aren't guys that are going to go out and get you a ton of points. And so Indiana has to find a way to slow this game down a little bit, get it in the 60s or maybe the low 70s so that you can really lean on Khalil and Malik down low. And then I think the other guy who is huge tonight that I mentioned on the postgame show last night is Mackenzie Mbako. He was still kind of going through some of his struggles when we played them the first time in January. 6 points, only 2 of 6 from the field, really didn't get that involved in the game. He was much better the second time around with 22 points. The problem is, again, it was still a 15-point deficit. So Mackenzie jumps up and scores like that. Why did we lose? Well, Trey Galloway really had one of his worst games of the season. 8 points, had 6 turnovers. Indiana didn't turn it over as much in that second game, only with 10, but Nebraska only had 8. So, again, you're still at a deficit from the turnover percentage, and Nebraska just absolutely annihilated us from the 3-point line in that game. They made 14, we made 4. And so that's just not sustainable. So somehow, some way, Indiana has to limit turnovers so that they're not at a possession disadvantage. The rebounding was actually pretty good against Nebraska in both games. And so obviously we need to do that also. But, I think Tony Adrania mentioned a great stat on Twitter, which is I think it was, when Nebraska has 17 or more free throws, they're like 15-2, and obviously not as good, when you don't give them that. And I think that's a really important point because this team is going to get efficiency from the 3-point line. They take enough, they make enough, they're going to really be efficient there. If you give them extra efficiency by putting them on the free throw line and they're a pretty good shooting team, it's just such an uphill battle. Now, a good explosive offensive team can stick with them and do that. That's not Indiana. And so, unless Indiana is just going to uncork the type of 3-point shooting that we haven't seen, and I suppose that's possible, kind of the formula for Indiana in terms of what has been demonstrated, slow this down, protect possessions, don't put them on the free throw line, and then even if they outshoot you from the 3-point line as you expect that they will, if you can get some hidden points, a hidden point advantage from the free throw line, if you can dominate in the paint, and get a little bit of production from the bench, that's the path to competing. But it's so important for Indiana over the first 35 minutes of the game. You've got to make sure that you don't lose touch with the Huskers. And in each of these games, a big run, especially keyed by Keisei Tominaga, has really kind of allowed the game to get away from Indiana. And this has been a team where that has happened because this isn't a team that's really built to come back. So, am I confident about tonight? I can't say I'm confident because there's so many elements of this matchup that are really difficult for Indiana, and especially difficult when you're playing shorthanded at the guard position. And so you look at it from an objective standpoint. It was much easier to paint a picture for why Indiana would bounce back against Penn State as opposed to Nebraska. That said, the way this team has played through the last 5 games, I wouldn't want to bet against them because they've got that kind of mental toughness and togetherness and that belief that sometimes teams need to win a game where the matchup doesn't look right. And, maybe Nebraska comes out on a neutral court, has a bad shooting night, and here we go. I think if this game is close, I like Indiana's chances because this team is battle-tested. They can make big plays down the stretch. They've got, 2 go-to guys that they can go get buckets with, and Khalil Ware and Malik Renew. That's a big advantage. The question is, can Indiana keep it close in the last 5 minutes? They haven't been able to do that against Nebraska or against teams like Nebraska. And so that is the big, kind of bridge that they have to cross in this game. If they can do it and keep it close, I like our chances late. But I think, if you're worried about another game that goes how the first couple have gone, I share those worries. And I think that the number one thing Indiana's got to do is limit turnovers. Possessions are just going to be so important against a team that can just drown you in 3-point volume. You can't give them extra chance and extra chance. And so, that a lot of that is going to fall on Xavier Johnson, who has to both be a playmaker because we're going to need more offense tonight, but he's got to do it in a smart way where he doesn't turn the ball over a lot. And the same goes for Gabe Cupps, who I think has been a lot better the last 2 games. He has to keep playing that way for Indiana to have a chance tonight. So anyway, hope that was halfway decent. Oh, yeah. So Jeff says, if you keep that camera angle, trim the nose hairs. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got some work to do on the overall presentation here. I'm mostly just worried about the actual the bandwidth and the connection and how it all sounds. So if it all sounds good, then I feel good about tonight. I think Coach Marlowe is going to be here with me. Ryan's out, Coach is out, Andy is out, Tony's out, Galen's out. But I think Coach Marlowe will be here, and we'll see. We may get someone else to stop by. But either way, I mean, I think I speak for all of us when I say 3 weeks ago, this team was not fun to watch. And I think a lot of us, whether you fell into the camp of people who were, just kind of giving up on the season because it didn't feel like the team had much juice yet. And obviously there was, going all the way to the other extreme of, wanting the team to lose, for people who wanted a coaching change. I certainly never fell into that category, despite, some of my questions about the staff and some of the things that have gone on this season. But, man, I have really enjoyed watching this team play over the last 5 games because even when it's ugly, like against Penn State, they're playing hard. They really look like winning matters. And I think the problem a lot of Indiana fans had with games this season is it looked and felt at times like winning didn't matter. Was that fair? I don't know. Sometimes those things can be really tough to assess from afar and from TV, just watching on TV. But that's how it came across, and that's the visceral feeling that a lot of Indiana fans had. And what's changed over these last 5 games is, again, just guys playing with a better competitive spirit, with more togetherness, and really kind of treating the game like they would hate to lose it and making plays driven by that. And that sounds so basic, and in a lot of ways it is, but it's what we didn't see that much from this team. And maybe it just took some maturing. Maybe it took playing together to build that continuity, getting guys healthy. I think all of those are fair. No one thing explains it all. But I think you start to add all of those factors up and, you start to understand a little bit more maybe why things didn't go how we thought they would early and why they're coming around now. And on the flip side, there's also a little bit of frustration seeing them play this way the last 5 games because it's like, man, where was this? Because it's, you want to add all these things up and say, well, okay, reason X, reason Y, reason Z, all this stuff. But it's also kind of strange to think that all that stuff just came together at one time down the stretch for these final 5 games. Like something has happened, something is different with the way that this team is operating. And I do think it's also fair to wonder, why couldn't that have occurred a little bit early in the season? And that is really the struggle of this season, trying to process it, is there's all these things. It's like, okay, we're bad, and I can give you XYZ reason why, but it still doesn't feel like it fully explains why we're this bad. And then you come here, and it's like, well, we're playing much better, and it seems like these are things that can be built upon, but it does make you wonder why it took so long to get here. And just that, kind of the contradictions and just some of that cognitive dissonance has made it a little bit challenging, but so much better, to end the season like this, where the program is really showing some life, the team is showing some life, and that's good. A lot of questions to be answered this offseason about what it'll look like moving forward, but we've got another day of basketball with this team, and it's been really fun watching them, and I hope it is tonight, and I hope we're able to come on here and have a good, useful postgame show for y'all afterwards. So let me just check here. Good. So it sounds like video's good, sound is good. Just bear with me when we do the show live, because I did see some connection unstable notices earlier. So if that happens, I apologize in advance. And Coach Marlowe is a pro at doing this. He's been doing it with doing the work. So he should be able to help out if anything happens. Tony says you can be honest and tell us you're relegated to the garage. Okay, fine. I got kicked out of the house. I didn't say whose in-laws it was. I'm just at somebody's in-laws' house. No, I'm kidding. Although, I probably need to go inside and do some stuff, or I may get kicked out. I can see people looking at me from the window. Why is he still talking to himself in the car? Phil says, yes, you better not get behind by 16 points. 100%. You have to maintain touch with them because this Nebraska team really is a team, and you saw it a lot this season with how they were playing at home, but then struggling on the road and struggling away from home. And that is a reason to think, hey, maybe Indiana's got a shot here, is this Nebraska team hasn't been as good away from home. And they've been a team that when things are going well and they're feeding off each other and Tominaga's rolling, they can really pick up some steam. When those things aren't happening, now you've got a chance to compete against them. So Indiana's got to find a way. Just don't, they make a couple plays. You've got to do whatever it takes to get a stop on the next possession and not let, 2 straight scoring possessions turn into 5. Because that's where you can really get in trouble with them. Galloway being hurt, Justin says worries him. Absolutely. And it just doesn't look like there's anything that we can do about that at this point. And it's a real shame because Trey was playing the best basketball of his career. But we're going to have to make do without him. And I'm proud of the guys for how they did it last night. And hopefully, all those guards can step up and continue to do that tonight. Jack says, any chance that we win the next 2 and we're in? So that would be winning tonight and then beating the winner of Illinois and Ohio State, independent of what happens on Sunday. I am no bracketologist. Based on my read of it, I don't see a path there unless Indiana wins both games by like 50 points and just has a huge jump in the metrics. There's no bracketologist worth respecting who thinks that can happen. And so I don't want to say that to throw cold water on it. Still would love to see this team win those games. They still matter. But it just seems like they dug themselves such a hole that even winning 3 straight in the Big Ten tournament isn't going to be enough. I really think to make the actual tournament, they're going to have to win on Sunday, which stinks, but is also why, I think back to all those postgame shows at the start of the season, even as far back as the exhibition games. In the Army game and Florida Gulf Coast and Wright State and all these. And it's like, we'd come on the postgame show. We want to be happy about the win. But it's like, man, if we keep doing this, we are digging ourselves such a hole, in the first month of the season, we're not going to be able to get out of it. And it wasn't just that stuff, continuing to get blown out by Purdue and blown out by Nebraska. All these blowouts also hurt Indiana's metrics. But if you had just handled business a little bit better in November, and you win those games, you beat Army instead of by, 6 or whatever it was, and you beat them by 12 or 14. Not even like full domination, but just play a little bit better. Things are a little different right now. And to me, it's one of the biggest lessons I hope the program takes moving forward, which is, yes, you have to allow for some development, and you're going to try new things, and who you are in February and March is different than who you are in November and December. But you've still got to go out and perform in those games. And, ideas like trying to build an all-bench unit and just some of the things Indiana did really seem to kind of work against them in terms of the way college basketball teams are ranked and analyzed. And that is not something that you have to think about in the NBA. And so I hope just in terms of, building rosters that have a little more continuity so they can hit the ground running, but also just from a strategic in-game decision standpoint, I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn to hopefully put ourselves in a better position so, we're not so far behind the 8 ball at the end of the season, because it's a shame. I feel like the way this team is playing, if they did get into the tournament, we don't have the depth and the guard play to make a deep run, but I think we could win a game or two the way we're playing right now. I doubt we'll get the chance, but I'd love to see it, against the kind of opponent that we might play in the first or second round. So it's just a shame that we're probably not going to have that chance. And I understand a lot of the reasons why this team started out slow, and yet it still feels like in hindsight there were things we could have done better and differently with a more college basketball focused mindset to do it, to put ourselves in a better position. So we'll see. Yeah, Anthony says don't get locked out. Definitely need to do that. I've got to remind my father-in-law again not to lock me out. Yeah, Phil says, worry about tonight because you lose, it's over. That's true. I do think last night's victory against Penn State probably gave us a shot at the NIT if we won it. And then a lot of that will depend on, okay, well, who's going to play in the NIT? Because if you have guys who are getting ready for an NBA career or getting ready to transfer, they may not want to play. And so if you can't field a competitive roster, fine, I get it. But otherwise, I would really like to take the opportunity, and whoever can play, let's go see what we can do. But again, all that stuff we can focus on after tonight's game and after, we just see how many more games this team has. Assembly car. That's very clever, Howie. I like that. I like that. Hey, Michael Morris, watching from the Panama Canal. Very nice. Very nice. Yes, David, revenge tour. That's right. Started against Penn State. Let's do it again now. Chad says, who else but Jared runs around with a mic in his car? Always have to be ready to record at a moment's notice. I definitely was not expecting to be doing this on Friday night, in part because, you wondered if the team would win on Thursday. They did. But being the only one who can host tonight, I'm glad I brought this. That's for sure. Did not get kicked out of the house, though, which is nice. And I'm not driving either. I'm just parked right here in the driveway. Andy says, any comments on Juwan Howard getting fired? I mean, they bottomed out this year. And I think you've seen a slow and steady decline, kind of similar to Mike Davis in a sense, where Mike Davis took over for Bob Knight. Bob Knight had really recruited what looked like it might be his last great, kind of fully cohesive team. After really having some recruiting misadventures in the late 90s, that core that he recruited really looked poised to, kind of get Indiana back to what we thought, it could be and what it had been under Bob Knight. And, then obviously everything happens, but Mike Davis takes over. And I remember a lot of people talked about at the time, wow, like these guys, it's like they learned the game under Coach Knight and learned some of those fundamentals, and now Mike Davis is kind of letting them play. Because there was that whole line of thought during the end of the Knight era that, he's not letting them play, and there's no joy there, and all that, those different things. And it's like, wow, Davis is letting them play, and the fundamentals that they learned combined with the talent, this is really exciting. And obviously that run was incredibly exciting. And, Mike Davis goes down in Indiana history for being a part of that. But the further and further that you got removed from Bob Knight's influence on that roster, the worse and worse the results got. And there were some ups and downs. It wasn't all bad. But, by the end, it was obvious to everybody that it was time to go. And I think you saw some similarities with Juwan Howard, where he took over a program where John Beilein obviously was a stickler for fundamentals and really developing basketball players who could think and play the game. And Juwan Howard came in with that, built on top of that, recruited well, and they really did well for a couple of seasons, but it's been a slow, steady decline since then. And it's not the first time that we've seen that. So I don't know enough about what is going on behind the scenes in that program to know how much of that was piled on top of an 8-24 record or whatever it was. But to see Michigan basketball bottom out like this, like they were this season, where they just basically weren't even competitive in the Big Ten, and then some of the other issues that he's had, I think it makes sense. So I don't know where they go from here, but I certainly don't, I think the decision made all the sense in the world for them to do that. So Chad says, your pick for second in points tonight after where? I am actually going super optimistic. I am picking Mackenzie Mbako to lead the team in scoring tonight, 20+. I loved his aggressiveness last night. I love that he kept shooting. I trust him as a shooter. I think Mackenzie leads us in scoring. And I think Khalil Ware's going to have a good game too. So that means I really think Mackenzie's going to have a big game. And I think that's part of the path to winning is Khalil continue to dominate like he has been. Mackenzie has to give the extra scoring punch. We need to get Malik back, to being 15, 16-point Malik. Get a little bit from the guards. That's your path to winning as long as you can keep Nebraska in the mid-70s. So I'm going with Mbako. Bold pick, and I won't be surprised at all if Ware ends up leading us in scoring. He's been incredible. But I really like what I think we'll see from Mbako tonight. Josh, do we know if Trey is out tonight? Seems likely that he will be. I mean, I think, Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything credible that would suggest that he is going to play. I would love to be pleasantly surprised by that. But I think it's smart for them to hold him out. Even if he could play, he's got a long basketball career ahead of him. He's too important for what the team needs to do next season. And as much as we really want to see this team make a run to Sunday, the reasonable risk reward of playing an injured Trey Galloway, to me, isn't worth what you could expect from it. And I know in sports you don't always want to try and make the reasonable arguments. It's like, let's go all out to win this. I think if there is a chance that he could play, but that he could re-injure something, then you can't let him. And I think that's what's happening. Let's see. And hopefully we get some good officiating. Every moment of the Big Ten tournament I've watched so far, and I haven't watched it all, but it's all been pretty poorly officiated on both sides. Like, it hasn't been like, oh, they really want someone to win. I thought last night was terrible. But at least it went both ways, I guess. So we got that going for us. How many fouls from Malik tonight? I mean, probably 4. I hope not, but that seems to be what'll happen. So anyway, thank you, everybody. I got to get back in here and do some stuff around the house, help my mother-in-law get dinner ready. But I'm glad this worked. So it seems like this will be okay tonight. So it'll be me. It'll be Coach Marlowe here on the postgame show. And hopefully it's a victorious one and we can keep on talking. I was ready for the offseason about 3 weeks ago. I'm not ready for it now. Let's keep playing games because as soon as this is over, we don't have any more Indiana basketball to look forward to and watch. So I've really enjoyed this 5-game winning streak. Hopefully it continues tonight. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the feedback on how everything sounds, and we'll talk to you all tonight.